you were working on more than one level at the same time, and you had, in fact, at least 4 different outcomes you were going for. So I think,
yes.
So let's start off identifying those 4 outcomes and then getting more and more specific about what it was that let you know to go to those outcomes and how, in fact, you accomplished them.
Okay.
Okay? The first outcome that Leslie was going for, perhaps a meta outcome in this case, was to install feelings of strong self-worth in Hazel. The second outcome was to install a generative sequence in Hazel and attach it to all of those contexts, all of those situations in Hazel's life, like being at a party, like hearing her husband telling her about his day, where previously jealousy would occur. And attach a sequence to those contexts, not doing away with jealousy, but counting on jealousy being there, and instead chaining other states and behaviors to that, taking her from jealous and being able to appreciate that as a warning, to remembering and being reassured that she has made him feel more loved than anyone else, to confident in the future that she will be able to do that again. The third outcome was installing a strategy at that point in that generative sequence that I just described, which is necessary as a choice point. So when you got to the point where you were giving her more sensory experience, she was making more discriminations in the present, she didn't have a strategy prior to your session of knowing how to make the determination whether it was appropriate to be jealous or not. And at that point, you installed a strategy that allowed her to make discriminations and, most importantly, or certainly importantly, to change the way, what she was paying attention to. Change it from paying attention to the woman, and
yes.
Is this a threat, to how Root, her husband, was feeling on the inside, which made a big change. Then
well, sure,
made a big difference.
And since in the beginning it was simply woman, it wasn't anything about the qualities of the interaction, but yes, most importantly, his response. Right. What's going on inside of him.
Right. Now, the fourth outcome that Leslie was going for was an outcome that had to do with maintaining and enhancing their relationship, going beyond the piece of work just for Hazel and how she was feeling, and applying the process that was going on to their relationship as a whole.
Oh yes, I wouldn't pass that up.
Right. You'd never pass that
no,
up.
No, I would never pass that up.
So, let's take one outcome, the first outcome that you were going for, and which was installing a sense of self-worth.
Yes.
And
yes, actually, there's a point I'd like to make about that. While that's certainly my outcome, in the very beginning, I was gathering information about the strength, so to speak, of her self-concept, of her self-worth. And what I discovered is what made that very primary outcome to go for in this piece of work. First thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to tell me about some things about yourself that you are really pleased with, that you feel proud of, that you appreciate.
Let's see.
When you asked her to come up with things
that she appreciated about herself,
she had a hard time doing that. And what
yes.
she could come up to was she was a good kid to be with. And when she has, as her own concept of self, only those pieces, that she's fun, that she can joke, that she might be attractive, then if that's all that she has, then anyone else who has those things.
Sure. And when I asked her about how did she get him to fall in love with her, when she said, well, I just think he's neat. It's like she didn't have her experience, her memories were not categorized. She didn't have available access to how powerful she is in her relationship with him.
And she had nothing about the special effect and impact she had on him in creating that response in him.
No, in fact, if there's something I would like to have the opportunity to do or check on with Hazel in the future, would certainly be how much that has generalized in her experience. Whether or not she is noticing, detecting the effect, the impact that she has on a lot of the people in her life.
Now, at that point in the interaction, when she has difficulty accessing,
this was not an overconfident, smug woman.
right?
Certainly this was a piece that let me know in terms of whether it was a problem of possessiveness or, as I said before, self-worth, self-concept, that she might be interchangeable. That led me to take another step in that direction.
4 or 5 minutes later, in the information gathering process, you came upon another thing, again, that let you know something about the self-worth and what had to be done.
It's very difficult to be forgiving.
To yourself? Why is it? Forgiving about what?
Well, just even little mistakes, and it's funny, it's this voice that I've been trying to remember to use doesn't feel that way, but that's only like one little part.
Okay, now wait, this voice, that it doesn't really feel that way. It doesn't feel like...
Well, it doesn't feel like I'm not deserving of consideration and forgiveness, and it feels like, hey, she's a good kid, as good as any client,
She's a person.
Yeah, we can be there for her. And then other parts of me just think it's hopeless. Kind of forget it.
Then you don't waste any time after that, you begin installing that sense of self-worth. And you do it, it's one of these...
I couldn't not.
Right, and it's one of the things that you start to do very covertly. And you are able to install that sense of self-worth merely by directing what she's paying attention to, that she may not have thought about before or thought about in the same way. And by asking her questions, at making statements, you allow her to access the information in a way that it seems to be just something that's naturally occurring in the conversation and not an intervention at all, and yet it's a very powerful intervention.
Actually, yes, asking questions is at least amongst the top 3 kinds of interventions there are in all the world. Because as you ask a question, you direct a person's experience. It's like if I ask you, how are you wonderful? That's a lot different than asking someone what's wrong or what do they feel bad about, or that a question directs a person's experience. And it does so in a covert way to the extent that all of a sudden they're surprised at their own experience. Now, can you imagine how that looks to your husband?
Let's see.
How does seeing you do something really awkward and blowing, and how does it look to him?
Oh, he's pretty kind. But that's important because he's much cooler about me than I am. In the sense of, it's fine. So
yeah, he loves you.
Yeah, you felt it.
He loves you, even with the flubbing. But I didn't know ahead of time 100% that was going to be fine in the eyes of her husband. But I needed to know whether or not it would be. I needed to know whether or not Hazel's self-criticism was supported by her husband, or was it just hers? Because if he also was very critical of her, if he also held very perfectionistic type criteria by which he judged her behavior, then that was something else I was going to need to do something about. I could not go any further than that. I would need to protect her from criticism from her husband, as well as from herself. So it was both, my hope certainly was that she would look good to him, even when she was awkward. And that would let me know that, he was good to her. It would let me know that this self-criticism was hers, and I could continue to work with it just with her. So.
And you continue to support that piece when later you tell her that, hey, he knows you in all of your seasons. Again, presupposing when you've been awkward, when you've been unpleasant, when you've been angry, when you've been...
Well, I've never known anybody who... It's like perhaps a a generalization, but it seems important to people that if they're loved, in order to be secure in feeling loved, that they also believe that they're known. So it's not like waiting to be found out. You ever realize that in 3 years, it's like this man knows you. He knows you in all your seasons, so to speak. He knows you when you're feeling poorly, about yourself or about him. He's, I'm sure by now, faced your anger, all kinds of things, as well as your love and your passion and your sweetness and your kindness. He knows you and he loves you.
Hazel is able to access that her husband loves her.
Yes.
And she knows this because he puts up with her. He's patient with her. And of course, this is not going to be good enough for her to have a strong sense of self-worth. So you pursue this further by asking her, what else, what other ways does she know?
Yeah, he tells her jokes.
Right. And you keep going until you get something, more of a substance that she can have as a strong basis for reassurance
Yes.
in herself. So let's take another look at that sequence and how Leslie draws that out and leads gently Hazel to that place where Hazel is able to come up with that information on her own.
He didn't have to get me to love him, but why I still love him is because, well, he's real willing to go for it with me.
So he's there with you.
Yeah.
And he's willing to go for it. Now, what do you mean by go for it with
Well,
you?
it's
What's he
like-
willing to go for?
It's like to go for making our life more terrific together, to checking things out that aren't going perfectly and figuring out solutions and then going, yeah, let's do that. And kind of that feeling of just the fun of making things more and more fun.
So it doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
And he's not afraid to look at what isn't all that you want it to be,
Right.
and to go about doing things.
Right, and to talk about it, communicate about
So
it.
you're so important to him that he's willing to do that.
Yeah.
He would not risk losing you or letting it fall below a level of mutual enjoyment, satisfaction, pleasure.
No, I don't think
He's
so.
not willing to do that.
I don't think so.
So you're that important to him.
Yeah, I think so.
It's not something that, it's like, doesn't have to worry about or think about or pay attention to or take for granted or...
He likes to do all those things, pay attention and yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that before. Like, right? I think that he was so delighted that someone found him so delightful and continues to. I find him more delightful all the time, really.
So you bring out all that he is. You let him be more than he would be without you.
I'm not sure about that.
Oh, come on. When you go, and look at him, and he responds like that, fully, it's like whatever you're responding to him. That's the whole thing about being in a couple relationship. It's about detecting and responding to those parts of one another that make you more than you would be alone.
Right. No, I can, yes. I can,
So
yeah. Uh-huh.
it really sounds
Yeah.
like, while he is with you,
Right.
and throughout that period, that's why does he want to be with you? Why does he want to stay with you? Why does he really care enough to take risks and to look at what's not right because he never wants to lose you? Is because he's more of who he wants to be with you. It's like being with you isn't a subtraction. It's not a compromise. It's an expansion.
Yeah, I can see that.
And you do that for him.
Yeah, that's easy.
That's easy, huh? All the things you take for granted. And you say he's with you because he's patient. You know he loves you.
So once you establish this new meaning for her, new way of her understanding her role and her impact on him, and that it was in part because of her that he is all
Yes.
that he is.
Yes.
This went a long ways now in cementing not only the feelings of self-worth, but undermining jealousy. Put up with
All the information that I was getting from her was that she had no sense of importance. It was as if she was irrelevant to him. And she didn't know. See, I have the benefit of having seen so many couples where you know that they're making each other less than they can be, where they're taking away, they're subtracting from one another. And that her response to him, as she would do, as she showed you all, and her believing in him, her loving him, elicited in him his resources and allowed him to be more with her. I had no doubt about that whatsoever. And I wanted her very much to recognize that she was making a contribution to him. Knowing from the first piece, when she said that what she felt good about was her work with people. It let me know, and I'm going to say this very loosely, but it let me know that it was important to Hazel to be having an impact, to be making a contribution to others. And this was an opportunity for me to use that information and apply it towards their relationship and towards her importance in it, which would then give her more of a basis, again, for security, self-worth, and would undermine that jealousy.
And again, later in the session, you asked her another question, which not only helped to cement and reassure her of her self-worth, but also provided the basis for her reassurance in the generative sequence, which we were going to move next, which had to be there.
And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to memories that you have of times when you know that you made him happier than he could be with anyone else. You don't have to talk about him. I just want you to go, and I would like you to go and get 3.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you something. Do you think that those are something that he could forget?
No.
I believe you. In therapy, you're going to need to be able to access states of self-worth frequently, and that it's very important to access them in ways that can be verifiable and experienced, so that they have a basis for that self-worth in their past, in their present, as well as into their future, that it's something that they're going to be able to do again. For instance, it's not particularly useful for you to build someone's whole self-concept, self-worth, say on the fact that they were the high school quarterback, and now that's not lying in their future. The other piece about self-worth is making it appropriate to the context. So for this context, for Hazel with jealousy, that her self-worth, that her security concerned her ability to have an impact on her husband, a positive impact, a powerful impact on her husband. If it had been someone who felt inadequate in learning situations, then the basis of that self-worth would need to be in relationship to that context, about intelligence and learning.
The next level, next outcome that Leslie was going for with Hazel was to establish that generative sequence. Generative sequence, a generative chain, as you ran her through, is a powerful intervention, and one that you use in many different contexts as long as there are states, internal states, that are unpleasant, undesirable, that the person seems to experience often.
Right, yes. The indicator for using a generative chain is that the state has 2 elements, one, an internal state, an emotional quality, as well as some type of computation. The other indicator to use the generative chain sequence is that it's a theme in their life. So whether it's regrets or anxiety, or in this case jealousy, it's something that you can count on comes up often enough that you need to attach the intervention, the resources, to the state itself. Because it would be very difficult to attach it to every single stimulus out in the world that caused it. So you attach it to the state itself. Now, I really like the generative sequence. One of the things that it does is utilize a presupposition from neurolinguistic programming, which is that all behaviors are relevant, are useful in some way. And so often I found that people, if they have an unpleasant emotion, they just want it to go away, like a sore throat. They just want it to go away. And that's not useful. It's not ecological. that every state, every emotion has some usefulness, some meaning to it. Regrets will tell you what you could have done. They will point the way to what to change and make different in the future. In this case, jealousy. Jealousy can be very useful, and which I worked with Hazel throughout for that to be evident to her. Jealousy, that feeling, it's a feeling that goes, that man's very important to me. Okay? And that's a wonderful thing to know.
The functional attribute of the state of jealousy being a warning is something that Leslie works to attach and create meaning to early on in the work. As a matter of fact, the third, I think, response in the tape was where you began to set up jealousy as something valuable.
Yes, it's both setting up the functional attribute and breaking that connection for her that being jealous is being bad. So, you want to not be jealous. And who is it that you get jealous concerning?
With my husband.
Okay. So you love him a lot.
Yeah.
Now, a functional attribute of a negative state is not the same as a positive byproduct or secondary gain. Positive byproduct or secondary gain of any state or behavior is something which tends to keep a person in that state or behavior. It's something that the person is getting out of it, which keeps them in it rather than giving it up. A functional attribute, rather, tends to take someone someplace else.
Sure, it's useful. I mean, I think the most classic situation that people are familiar with in terms of secondary gain is any kind of illness. So if you take it, a school child is ill and gets to stay home from school. And depending on who that child's parents are, perhaps gets to be fussed over, watch a lot of television, get jello. I mean, everyone, the whole thing about getting a tonsillectomy and getting to eat all the ice cream that you could want. That's different than the functional attribute of any kind of illness, symptom. The functional attribute is a warning. It lets you know there's something going on in your body that needs attention.
So you've done several things at this point to get her to appreciate jealousy as having a different meaning, one that's positive to her. Mm-hmm. And now you need to test. You need to know when, in fact, does she have that meaning? When is it significant, not just intellectually?
Yes. I can't go on, really. There's no point in continuing the intervention until that functional attribute, until experiencing jealousy as a useful response is integrated. It tells us that the first thing we need to do is to make a separation in terms of detecting when is it appropriate to be jealous and when is it something you can relax about.
Right. Good idea.
Yes. If it's something to be jealous about, I mean, your emotional well-being has some connection with what's going on with him. And you want to be protected from some big surprise. It's
right.
like, you know.
I'm forgiving that.
Great.
So the first step in the generative sequence is to identify an unwanted state,
Yes.
an unpleasant state, and to ascribe to it a functional attribute which the person recognizes and accepts as being positive and meaningful.
Yes, and again, the functional attribute needs to be established in connection to the person, the individual. See, it wouldn't be the same functional attribute if that person was jealous and their criteria, it had to do with being really possessive. It wouldn't be the same functional attribute if they had a relationship in which their partner was being abusive of them. Then it would need to be different. If their partner was being abusive of them, the functional attribute would need to be more about a warning about a need to protect themselves, perhaps about setting limits, perhaps about letting their partner know that that was unacceptable.
The second step, then, after that's accomplished, is to elicit and establish in her a strong feeling of appreciation for herself.
Yes.
For being able to know that, to be able to know that there's something to pay attention to.
Jealousy, that feeling, it's a feeling that goes, that man's very important to me. Okay? And that's a wonderful thing to know. I mean, what would happen, Hazel, if you didn't have it? What if you didn't have anything that said, this man is really important to me?
Oh gosh, we wouldn't be together.
No, and you'd be apt to make you would be apt to make terrible mistakes.
Mistakes.
Like ignoring him.
Oh yeah.
Like not keeping track of his well-being.
Right.
If you had nothing that went, this man's really important to me, he's really precious, and it is possible in the world to lose him. It is possible in the world to lose him. If you had nothing that let you know that, there wouldn't be anything to engage those behaviors, to check on how things have been and are with you and how you want them to be.
That's true. Gosh.
Again, to make the point, this step, the self-appreciation step, concerning the present state, is again to break whatever connections are there concerning that it's bad to have that feeling, that it's bad to be jealous. So it attaches not only that the state is worthwhile, but that how wonderful that they have it. So in this case, that being jealous for Hazel was another piece of evidence that she's a good and loving person.
And again, as you do in all of your work, as the work progresses, you're constantly testing to see,
yes,
is this state here? Is this state here? Or, gee, it's great.
Sure.
Feels good to me, but
well,
is
this
it
makes
there?
sense. Here, I'll just tell you about it, and then I know I'll write it down on a piece of paper. You take it home and read it, and it'll be there because it's logical. No, I have to see it in the person.
Well, once a person and knows that they have an unpleasant state and now appreciates it as something valuable to
and
them.
themselves, yes.
And they appreciate themselves for being able to know that.
Yes.
The next thing is, what do I do about it? Now, how do I evaluate this to decide whether, in fact, this is something to be worried about or not? With Hazel, it became a matter of being able to make a determination whether the context she was in, what was going on, who the people were, was a situation that was worth feeling jealous about,
Yes.
or not appropriate to feel jealous
And
about.
the important point here is that I had to bring Hazel to this point before she could make those kind of distinct discriminations about the qualities of it. In the beginning, she was so overwhelmed by feeling jealous, and as you saw at some point along in the tape, she was actually already into grief that she'd already lost him. That's not the place. That's not the resourceful state from which a person can make fine sensory discriminations. So why didn't I have her do this before she ever felt jealous? Because you could count on the jealousy to be there first. And so it's like accepting that, utilizing that, changing her state, and now bringing her to the point where she's really attending to whether or not it's something worth being jealous about. Now, I want you to be sure to notice that as the sequence progressed, the amount of time it took between detection and this point was very small, very small. So be willing to let it take time in the beginning, knowing that it will collapse as you accomplish each step, as it's installed.
Hazel did not have a lot of ways to make discriminations. As a matter of fact, it was just any woman would do it.
Except mother, and then...
And so you did a wonderful thing in that you had her imagine him being with another man.
Well, yes, and it was by making it a man, then it... could she tell if a man was interested in him? Was about making the discriminations in terms of the qualities of the interaction.
And when Hazel said, well, it seems to be a woman, and she said, well, gee, when I see a woman, it just sort of stops there. That's it. Then that's something that let Leslie know, in fact, she does need this strategy. There's no question about it. She does not have a way, and she isn't making discriminations now.
Yes, it's true. And I want you to look at the interacting, and I want you to, what are the qualities in what you see to tell you the difference between an interaction between two people two interested people, and the interaction between a man and a woman.
Fascinating question. Well, they are a man and a woman.
Yes, this you can tell. Subtle hints.
And like, it's funny. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but that's almost enough.
Well, and
right, I kind of like stop there, you know.
So look at, keep it as far as you need to, but what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a look, and I want you to make, so if it was a man talking to him, it'd be no problem, okay? But could you tell if it was a man talking to him, if the man was interested in him?
The third level of work that Leslie accomplished, that is installing that strategy, is in fact done to insert and have available to the person and working at this choice point. It's what's necessary to make this choice point work. Now, the next step in the generative chain is reassurance.
Some of you may wonder why this step is necessary, since what it's really about is changing her behavior and her experience in the present and in the future. This step, the step of reassurance in a generative chain, is essential. It's the step that establishes their belief, a person's belief, in their ability to do what the whole generative sequence is about. It's recalling, because our beliefs are built on our memories. What do we know for sure? Something that we have experienced. And by organizing her memories in such a way that she was sure that she could have an impact upon Root, one that was powerful and the one that she wanted to have, then I can be assured, she can be assured, which is of course more important, that she's going to be able to go and do these behaviors in the present and in the future. They become more natural. It's not something that she has to gear up for. It's natural because it's part of who she is.
And part of building that kind of reassurance, which will assure that she will be able to be confident out in the future, is making sure that not only that she's paying attention to and remembering the experiences that are necessary for that, but also that she has a cause-effect relationship between her having control and her exercising the choice and the ability to make that happen. And if she knows from her past that she has made that happen, that she has made him happier than he could be with anyone else, then she can be confident in the future that she can also influence him in that way.
Yes, it's the thing that sets her apart from all those other people. She's not interchangeable.
As you go to secure that outcome,
yes,
that small outcome of establishing that cause-effect relationship and having her access those experiences, which will be the basis, serve as the foundation for that reassurance, you do it again, covertly, by asking a question.
Now I want to know something else. What did you do to get him to love you? An aside on that question, in contrasting it to the question that I asked her before that, about how did he get her to love him. Now that question was about going after self-worth for her, that she was worth him going out of his way, doing things to get her to love him. Now the question I asked her was designed. Now when I say designed, it's not that I take the time to think about them first. I just know that I want her to have a cause-effect relationship between her behavior and his emotions, his responses. That was earlier on, and as much as I would have liked to have gone ahead and established and gotten a basis for this reassurance, the responses that I got from Hazel at that point were not enough at all.
And I just think he's neat, and that's clear. I just go, and I think that, I just go,
I had to have the other steps accomplished, integrated, so that there's a usefulness to jealousy, that she could appreciate having it. And now she has a strategy by which she can make discriminations to know whether or not a situation is worth being jealous about. Now, for those situations in which, even with those discriminations, it is worth being jealous about, she needs to have some place to go. And that is, or I want her to go, is to be fully reassured. There isn't anything about that first piece that was strong enough to do what's needed here.
And so now Leslie pursues that by asking Hazel to come up with 3 past experiences where Hazel knows that she made him happier than he could have been with anyone else. And as she accesses those experiences powerfully, Leslie anchors those and anchors that state to utilize throughout the rest of the work.
Then don't you take that from there. Appreciate yourself, like the things that you've done for him to fall in love with you, for him to be in love with you.
Well, yeah.
Of course, right?
It takes a little while
Now,
to bring it up.
What I want you to do before, this is all going, it's like, I don't like you to do this, I'd like you to go to memories that you have, of times when you know that you made him happier than he could be with anyone else. You don't have to talk about him, I just want you to go, and I would like you to go and get 3.
Oh, dear.
I know it's going to be hard work for you to be that sort of,
Yeah, because
give yourself that credit.
Right, because I feel like I should check with him, and ask him, well, did this make you happier? But so I feel like, gosh, it's a little presumptuous of me, but I can think of one for sure. I think. Let's see. Oh, yeah.
All right. Now
Yeah, I got 3.
Oh, you've got 3?
Yeah.
Okay, you've got 3. Now, I'd like you to, how are you feeling when you were participating in each of those experiences? Great. Powerful? In a gentle...
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you something. Do you think that those are something that he could forget?
No.
I believe you.
The final step in the generative chain is to get the person to a state of confidence that they will, in fact, be able to move into the future and experience what they want to be able to experience. And in Hazel's case, it was moving from reassurance that she had the ability and that she knew how to, and that she, in fact, did make him happier.
With her than with anyone else, yes.
To be confident that she would be able to do that in the future.
Yes.
Leslie begins to establish that with Hazel at one point in the session by having her check first on the present situation and asking herself, how are things now? And once she's answered that satisfactorily, to ask her to think of something that she's going to do at the next opportunity in the future.
To take a look at that picture, you know that you have given him these experiences. I want you to consider for a moment as well, how are things between you right now, whatever the right now is.
You mean in that film?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fine.
They're fine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like you to think of something to do that you want to do at the next opportunity, the next time you're alone, that really, really makes him feel loved.
You mean the next time at that party that we're alone?
The next time you're going to be alone with him. So that's going on there, and you look at him, and you get that warning,
Yeah.
that goes, this man's really important to me, and I'm paying attention to what's going on because my well-being does have something to do with that, and then remembering, seeing him, how much you love him, and remembering those experiences that you have given to him so you can feel reassured.
I can think of what to do.
The next time you're alone, so it's like you want to know, you want to be fully reassured through time that
so
he
far
is,
out.
that he is happier with you than he could be with anyone else. And you have the past experiences. You want to know that there's one in your future too.
This is a good idea. Yeah, I can think of something to do.
Okay.
I can think of a bunch of things to do. But I can think of the first thing to do.
Okay, good.
Then you take care of another situation that needs to be taken care of, and that is, what if? What if he really is having a good time with
I
with
can't
another
leave
woman?
anything to chance. Well, I want him to be able to have a good time and for her to feel good about it. So it's like, what needs to be there? How is it possible for anyone to feel really good about their lover, their mate, spouse, having a good time with someone else? And certainly a piece of that is feeling secure about the well-being of their own relationship.
And Leslie connects those feelings of reassurance and confidence to that context with the use and reinforced by that anchor that's already been established.
Yeah, I can think of something to do.
Okay.
I can think of a bunch of things to do. But I can think of the first thing to do.
Okay, good. So that gives you something to do that you know. It's like even if. So he might have a good time feeling like someone finds him attractive.
Yeah.
But to be loved by you is incomparable.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
So once a person is appreciative for having this wonderful state that they thought before was a problem,
Yes.
and they can appreciate themselves with that, go to being reassured based on their experiences in the past, and are confident, not only based on their experiences in the past, but what they know that they can do in the future, you want to make sure that they do have the behaviors that are necessary to carry through on that.
Yes, yes.
And you're testing for that and making sure that those behaviors are there.
I want you to look at him. I want you to think of what you're going to do in the future, because you want to keep him happier with you. And do you have something to do with him later?
I just thought of something.
Okay, all right.
A lot of the information that Leslie gathers is not from what the person says, of course, but how they're responding non-verbally. And in the next clip, which takes place immediately after asking about these external behaviors, Hazel begins to list what she could do. And as she does so, she very gradually but clearly starts slipping back into the present state, the previous problem state, in how she looks, how she sounds, and that she backs away from going towards the interaction and doing something to how she used to act, which was sort of just walking away from it. Sensing that, seeing that, and hearing that, Leslie immediately, but gently, by asking her, "Are you sure?" and leading her, takes her back to being confident and, in fact, generating those behaviors that she really wants to be able to generate.
Now, what do you want to do in this situation?
I think let them talk. What I'd like to do is feel good about myself, like I just did,
Yes.
and about
Yes.
us, and about him, and I even feel good about him having a good time. That feels good too. And then I felt really excited about what I was going to do with him. Good about that. But right now, I would rather go check on our other guests. I would rather check in with them.
Okay. Now, I want to ask them, are you sure? I'd like you to check back and sort of look through it. Do you want to go over and... It's like, do you want to go over it all? Do you want to join in with them?
It would be
Are
fun
you
to check in just for a minute or two.
Okay.
Even that would be fun. Just going to slip under his arm and just check in with the two
Let
of
him
them.
kind of
Well, just
get your scent.
just to check in. But I don't want to stay and talk.
Okay, so you have other things that you want to do.
Yeah.
And so you can come in and check in comfortably, knowing that he loves you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm what I'd like to do is to ask him to dance later. I might say, "How about a dance later on?" Yeah, because that's what I wanted to do.
Okay.
We're learning.
Now,
Yeah.
will you do that? Is there
Yeah.
anything? So you have everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Leslie runs Hazel through this sequence, this generative chain, several times during the piece of work. Let's take a look now at one of those times so that you can see the entire sequence.
They're having a nice time.
They're having a nice time.
Right.
With each other.
Right.
Okay. And you get that feeling. Do you get the feeling that of a warning type
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
So
And
Joe
not
is
as
warning.
strong as some of the, but it's definitely there.
Okay. So it brings your attention to pay attention.
Right. I'm feeling pretty good right now. I think that's why it's less. But yeah, I definitely do feel it.
Yeah,
I
well,
can go into it.
Okay. So there's always that to check on.
Right. It's
So that
there.
you come out and watch what's the quality of this interaction.
Right.
Do I need to rescue him from something? Do I need to make my presence? You know, what is this? But more than anything else, and it's information that that man is important to you. You love him.
Yeah.
And to remember how much he loves you. And those experiences that he can't forget. The things that you have given to him. Okay, and I want you to look at him. I want you to think of what you're going to do in the future, because you want to keep him happier with you. In using generative chain as the intervention in a piece of work, it's important for people to know to only do one step at a time. That is, you don't jump ahead and try to accomplish something over here until the first steps are fully in. The power, a great deal of the power of a generative chain sequence is that they're all connected to states within the person. They're not connected to me, they're not connected to anything external, they're connected to one another. And it's very important that that's what makes it possible for it to be initiated and maintained by the subject, is that they're connected from the beginning to the person. Now, there are two things that install behaviors, beliefs, strategies in people, as far as we know. One is intensity, that is how meaningful, compelling, intense an experience is. The other is repetition. And in this case, I have both on my side in terms of installing it. There's so many examples of her having jealousy, it's easy to come up with more examples and having her go through the sequence. There are enough little differences in the examples that it's still meaningful to her. There's enough intensity in her emotions that are connected to this context, to her feelings about herself, to her feelings about her husband, that is tremendous insurance for this intervention being able to go through time with her in a pervasive way.
So the two things that need to be there are the intensity of the
Yes.
states themselves that are anchored and repetition.
Yes.
Enough time for that sequence of states to be installed so that it will go off automatically in the right context.
Sure, I don't take it for granted that it will be there until it's happened on its own a few times.
In order for the generative chain to be complete, you now need to go to another level, which you work on throughout the piece of work, which is to install in Hazel a strategy to utilize at the choice point
Yes.
in the generative chain.
Yes.
So the strategy that you install in Hazel first is attached to the context. So you elicit the context of being in a situation where she gets those feelings.
Yes.
And the first time that you do it, first time you ask her about that context, she gets a very powerful response. And you use an interesting technique at that point to disarm that, to be able to access the context which you need to be able
Yes,
to hook the strategy
I
onto.
really can't be effective with her as long as she's overwhelmed by those kinds of emotions that leave her in such an impoverished state, in a resourceless state. So I, in order to be effective, I need her to be resourceful, need her to feel comfortable, secure, whatever types of resources are appropriate for the intervention.
And the technique you use to accomplish that is a kind of dissociation by distance.
Yes, that is, dissociation by and large is the technique to utilize with a person if what's going on is that they're overwhelmed with emotions. You have to give them space, distance.
Right, so you asked...
perspective.
Yes, you asked her to make a picture way over there behind you. And at the same time of doing that, you not only accomplished that outcome, but you established a visual anchor.
Yes.
This anchor over your shoulder.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Well, yes, we kept all those unpleasant stimulus way off over this shoulder.
And that anchor, with that hand over the shoulder, is something that you also then incorporated as you ran her through the generative chain sequence and the strategy.
As far off in the distance as you need to, as small as you need to, so that it isn't overwhelming. I'd like you to see the last time you saw him interacting with another woman. All right, so you remember it. Okay.
It helps to make them real small.
Yeah, and far away, right. We'll move it up closer later, but you keep it way out there.
Yeah.
Okay, now you remember that. You can come back over here for a minute. Now, when that situation occurred, were you at a social, in a social
at a party.
situation? Right. Okay, all right. Now, I want you to again look it's way over there.
Once she can take a look at that situation and remain fairly comfortable, you then begin to
Have her make discriminations about it. The thing about keeping it off into the distance and allowing her to be as comfortable as possible so that she can see. If she's just overwhelmed with emotions, then she's not going to be able to make visual distinctions. And I want you to look at the interacting, and I want you to, what are the qualities in what you see to tell you the difference between an interaction between two people, two interested people, and the interaction between a man and a woman. Now, the other aspect that keeping it way over there is an advantage is that when she's able to move it closer, like so when they came up closer and they were right behind my left shoulder, that's another place where I have feedback that what I'm doing is working. Because when it came closer, she could see it near her without being overwhelmed. And that was definite feedback to me that I was moving in the appropriate direction to make a difference.
And you not only get her to make those discriminations by asking her explicitly for them, but by, again, embedding those suggestions in the language patterns that you use. And a good example of that is when Leslie asked her to take a look over there closely.
Now, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look way over there closely.
You then take her through a process of making finer and finer discriminations. You ask her to look for symmetry, knowing that it's necessary to start at a fairly obvious large level since she's not made small discriminations before, and that if you can lead her from the largest
Well, sure,
thing.
and it's easy for me to know about asking for symmetry because I worked enough with people in terms of behavior to know that there's a difference in the meaning of postures. So far, all we got is the exterior. How about how they're talking? What's their distance?
About 1.5 feet.
Okay, now does it look like, what's the symmetry of their bodies?
My husband is straight up and down, and the girl is asymmetrical.
Okay, so does she look like she's in one of those postures that are enticing and flirting?
Yeah.
She doesn't look like she's talking about nuclear reactors?
No.
Oh, okay.
And after you've accomplished that, one of the very important pieces to this was you then direct her from making discriminations about the woman and the interaction to what's going on inside of him.
That's where it counts. I mean, that's what's important in this whole problem is how is her husband responding? That's what counts. It doesn't matter if that woman It doesn't matter what she's doing. It matters how he is responding. Therein lies more of the basis for whether or not this is something to be jealous about or not. Is this something where it's indeed a useful warning?
And Leslie accomplishes that change in sorting from the woman and the interaction to her husband's internal state by not asking directly for it again, but by asking a question that she knows when Hazel goes to find the answer will have to make checks on his internal state.
I mean, it's really important for you to pay attention to the quality of the interaction.
Right.
Now, is she making a fool of herself?
Well,
Just take a look. Take a look. I mean, is she making a little bit of a fool of herself?
well, Root looks rather, my husband, looks rather skeptical. Come to think of it.
There are several times as you are working to install this strategy that Hazel begins to go off from where you're working at into another direction or jumping to another state, and you use effectively pattern interruptions, whether by humor, whether by a previous anchor that you have established.
Well, again, it's two things. I need her to maintain as resourceful a state as possible so that we can continue on to make this truly a generative sequence. And I don't want attached within this sequence a place where she goes and feels bad. I want it to be something where she can feel resourceful, powerful, loving, and loved throughout it. It's not necessary, it's not a contribution for her to feel otherwise to the outcome that we're going for. Also, as I said before, I need, in order for this generative sequence to be effective, I need each step to be attached to the one before it. And, as you probably noticed, there were times, I mean, Hazel is a bright, lovely person, woman, and she jumped ahead. And like, what is she going to do? She was already ready to go do something. And I wanted her very much to have more pieces before she went to that place, so I needed to interrupt that. So does she look like she's in one of those postures that are enticing and flirting?
Yeah.
She doesn't look like she's talking about nuclear reactors?
No.
Oh, okay. Wait, no, wait. It's not time to go there.
At least I don't feel like going to the kitchen anymore.
Good. That's great. That's great. So you're still there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really important for you to pay attention to the quality of the interaction. Okay, so.
No, I was just looking at them. I was thinking, I could walk up to them. I would want to sit right down. I mean, I wouldn't want to stand up.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, wait. We're going to get to that in just a minute.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to stand over them and say,
what are you doing? No, exactly. What are you
sail paper
talking about?
airplanes over that way as it goes. Have little warnings on them. Fortune cookies drop in their lap. Okay, now, it's like you, what am I going to do
Yeah.
about it? Okay, so you can tell they're having a pleasant interaction.
Yeah.
All right. And you have some of that feeling,
Yeah.
okay, that tells you that you really care about him.
Right.
All right.
Well-
Now, again, is this in a social context?
Yeah.
Is this, all right.
And he's
Okay.
enjoying himself. He's really enjoying the conversation.
All right, how can you tell that?
Well, he's laughing, and they're laughing, and he doesn't see me at all. I mean, for a long time, like an hour.
Oh, well, all right. Let's go back to the beginning of this.
Yeah. And I mean,
Let's not go to the end of the hour. Let's start at the beginning when you first noticed them together.
The way Leslie knows as she's working that what she's done has been accomplished so that she can go on to the next step is to watch for and listen for things like the following.
yeah, I mean, she's not a very good example because, you know,
Great. What
Yeah.
is she not a very good example of?
well, because I can see that he's not digging her. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
If you're with someone who, it's neat that they appreciate you, and you can kind of go, they appreciate me, and they're also very neat. That kind of makes it even neater.
And they have a good time
yeah.
together.
So she's not such a good example of that because he's not digging her so much now that I look at it.
How about that?
Later after she accesses another example with the woman in the parking lot,
Yes.
again, after you run her through that sequence and she makes the discrimination, she realizes that, no, this is not a situation to be jealous about after all. She realizes that there are things that she had never noticed before. This is another way that lets you know that, in fact, yes, this is installed and this is getting the outcome that I want it to get.
Yes.
She looks rather lost, actually.
Well, is this something for you to be jealous about, or is this not something?
It's not.
It's not
really, because she's inappropriate. It's more. Yeah,
Okay, so it's more like embarrassing, a little.
Yeah,
She's inappropriate.
I hadn't seen that before. No,
Okay, all
I
right.
hadn't seen it before.
She was able to make the discriminations about whether or not this was something to be jealous about. She was able to know, pay attention to, and recognize what her husband's responses were. And then something else which lets me know about Hazel is how she was attending to the other person, the woman. And again, redirecting her with humor about her not running over to do therapy or rescue this woman who was lost, but to continue on paying attention to her own states and experience to reach the outcome that we're going for.
The information gathering process never really stops. And later on in the session, you discover, she tells you, that there's another context in which jealousy takes place,
Yes.
which is when he comes home and is just telling her about his day. And the same change of sorting, the changing from the woman or what might have happened to what's going on inside of him,
Yes.
is what you go after, and that you want to be installed in that context as well as the context you've been working in.
Yes. So when he mentions, so there's something happened recently.
Yeah,
All right, and you know you want more information.
right.
So that feeling happens just enough to let you know, I want more information about this.
Right,
And-
but I'd love not to have to get the information. Like, it's never enough information. It's like, if I had a video
Oh.
of the whole thing, it might be enough.
you would still want to know what was going on inside of him while...
Right.
Well, I want you to take another look. I want you to ask something else. What is it that he wants while he's telling you?
Just to share his experiences.
Ah,
Like, that's real important to him.
so he wants you to be a part of.
Yeah. And I know one of the ways he knows he's loved is by my being interested in his experiences.
So he wants you to be a part
Of his
of.
experiences.
Mm-hmm.
One of the outcomes you're going for, and one of the natural byproducts, if she's paying attention to what's going on inside of him, is to get her to be interested. Not in the
Yes.
other woman, but him.
This is one of those situations where to figure out, establish what's the appropriate response for her to be having. This isn't the same as being at a party, he's talking to another woman, he's talking to her. And if her internal processing, if her experience is taken up with speculating about what took place between Root and this other woman, she's not going to be available to him. She's not going to be able to know what's going on with him. And so I was about directing her, in this case, into the present. What does he really want by telling you this? And that's, see, she could have answered in many ways. Again, I'm always gathering information until I'm done. If there was anything in her that believed that he was telling her that in order to make her jealous, I would need to know that, because that's what I would need to intervene with. But, as you could see, that wasn't the case at all.
And to test that not only wasn't the case, but that you had gotten her to sort for what was going on inside of him, and that changed her experience, is evident from what happened just a few minutes later in the interaction.
And then I'd like you to listen to him again. Tell you about whatever it was, the most recent time. And what happens?
Well, it was more like I was interested.
So it's more like you could just be interested
Right,
in...
I was interested in what he was saying.
Isn't that novel? What some security will do.
Right, I was interested.
You then proceed again, as you always will, to check on the ecology, on the appropriateness of how she's going to express her behaviors in those contexts now that she's gotten to that state.
Her husband's never going to know anything about what we're doing, Hazel and I, except by her behavior. It's like if she feels good but does nothing else externally, then the relationship hasn't been necessarily enhanced. And that's part of the outcome. And how do you think about treating him, being with him, while he's telling you those things with these feelings?
Well, different than I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like responding to him in the way I usually do.
Those other times.
Yeah.
Do you feel like moving closer to him? Do you feel...
Well, what I did was, like, he said the story, and he told about this really neat girl he met, you know, and who I haven't even met yet, which used to be the worst, right? and then I listened, and I had those good feelings, and then we took a cool drink up on the hill behind the house, you know.
The fourth level that Leslie is working on throughout the session is working on the outcome of enhancing and maintaining the relationship.
Yes, because this is a context that involves both of them. It's not enough for just Hazel to have something. I want their relationship to be richer, fuller as a result. There are things that I want for him that he's not already getting, that I want to make sure are available to him.
You waited to a particular point in the interaction before you talked to her about that you never knew a person yet
who didn't enjoy feeling attractive.
Yes,
to someone else.
And it was a very important piece in terms of the outcome you were going for, in terms of the relationships, as well as the other outcomes you were going for. And I think it's important for you to note that Leslie waited until after Hazel had the experience of having made the determination that there was a context, at least some context, where it was not appropriate to be jealous. And as she began to think about that, you brought her out so that she couldn't dwell on it too much, which is something that you do as you're working, that you're constantly taking people to a particular place and then not letting them go too far into it and come up with perhaps...
Well, yes, and in this situation specifically, Hazel was recognizing that Root was feeling good, that he was having a good time, and she was saying that she wanted him to have a good time, and she was starting to, I don't know how to put it, perhaps sink is a way, to sink back into that being afraid and this and that, but she really did want him to have a good time. So that was the time to pull her out and to utilize that. Now, I wanted from the beginning, from as soon as I knew a little bit about what was going on with Hazel and what she wanted, I wanted very much for her husband to be able to have this, for him to be able to enjoy being attractive to someone else, for him to be able to enjoy relating, interacting with women. Because if that's not there, it's definitely a limitation on him within the context of their relationship. That could cause trouble in time. But I needed to wait, as you were saying, I knew that I needed to wait until she was more secure. And so that I could attach her wanting him to be happy, that has to do with her good feelings about herself, to giving him that, so that I could make it something that she's giving him.
Well, he looks a little skeptical.
Okay, all right, so he's checking out what she's saying and
right.
What's going on here.
Right.
He is not leading her on.
No, definitely not. Definitely
Okay.
not.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you an aside.
Yeah.
Okay? I don't know your husband at all. but I never knew anyone who didn't need, on some level, or appreciate the idea of being attractive.
Yeah.
And that there are people in the world who would want them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something, very frankly. Do you want him to be able to have that experience?
Yes.
Okay.
I already thought about that, and definitely.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons I want to get rid of the jealousy. It's like, of course I want him to have that experience.
All right. So you want him to be able to feel attractive.
Absolutely. And I want...
And for him to
Right.
go, I'm so lucky to be with Hazel.
Right, right.
And you proceeded along by building complex equivalences as you went along to enhance that relationship. And in particular, you attached a new meaning to him talking to her about his day.
Always when I do that, I want you to know that it's not, now that's real to me. When I say that to her, I'm also checking, can this be real to her? If I get a response where she sneers, or she pulls away, or she does a give me a break kind of a thing, then I'm wrong. I mean, I have now information that tells me go in a different direction.
So let's take a look at a couple of different examples of Leslie taking a situation that has been perceived by Hazel one way and watching as Leslie builds a new meaning, a new complex equivalence for that same situation in a way that leads to the enhancement of the relationship.
And I don't want to harp with questions. That just makes me feel worse.
Well, the only way this is possible is because you forget that he loves you and that he's telling you about this.
Right.
He's sharing his day with
Right.
you. You sort of lose track
I do, yeah.
of the context. He's telling you about his day. He's telling you, and it includes some interaction with a woman.
Yeah.
And it's like he's sharing it with you like he shares a lot of things.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to take another look. I want you to ask something else. What is it that he wants while he's telling you?
Just to share his experiences.
Yeah.
Like, that's real important to him.
So he wants you to be a part of.
Yeah. And I know one of the ways he knows he's loved is by my being interested in his experiences.
So he wants you to be a part
Of his experiences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by listening and being interested is real important to him.
One of the ways he knows that you love him.
Right.
And one of the ways he lets you know that he loves you
Right.
is to tell you
Right.
about his experiences.
Right. He's happy.
Okay.
I do want him to be happy. He's happy.
It's just that you always want to know that he can't be as happy with anyone else as he can be with you.
Is that all right?
Yes. Do you want me to say it again? Yes.
Well, it seems a little selfish, but it would be nice.
Go for it, Hazel.
Okay.
Yes, it's all right. You can want him to be happier with you than with anyone else. You love him. You are happier with him than you would be or with anyone else. Yeah? Yes, yeah, it is. It's fine for you to want that. The basis of you wanting it, it's not about pinning him in. It's not about locking him up. It's not about wanting him to be happy with you by denying him anything. It's that his being more of who he wants to be when he's with you. You know, and through the up times and the down times, it's like the two of you have made a commitment about spending a good piece of your life together. Probably, I mean, I don't know if you have a commitment that goes till death do us part no matter what, but I know your commitment absolutely is not to deny one another anything, but to contribute and to give. Absolutely. And it's not just about in the moment, it's about over time.
Yeah.
So it's like him wanting him to be happier with you than with anyone else. That's not a selfish thing. I mean, it's like, I'm going to keep you, and I don't give a damn if you're miserable, you know, or whatever. You said I do, that's it, turkey. Forget what's this happiness crap? Who gives a No. Yes. Yes. Besides that, you're wanting him to be happier with you, more fulfilled with you, is the motivator for you to give to him.
Now that we've gone through the 4 different levels of outcomes that Leslie was working on, we'd like to go back through the procedural flow of the interaction, beginning with rapport, moving through gathering information and accessing resources, the interventions themselves, future pacing, and break down the smaller patterns that you utilize to affect that change. So let's begin with rapport.
Okay. Yes, I agree. This is a good place to begin. Yes, you have to start with rapport to be effective and continue with rapport. Those basic patterns that you've learned already in terms of mirroring and matching, of staying with the person, of knowing what's going on with them in terms of their emotions, in terms of their internal processing, so that you can be in rapport. Your ability to be in rapport so much influences how much you can lead them to resourceful states. They need very much to experience that you're on the same side and that you do understand and know their experience.
One of the ways that you use humor at the beginning in terms of rapport is you use it to be able to pace her internal states. And in addition to mirroring and matching body postures and predicates and all of the basics, the ability to keep track of and detect internal states and then be able to pace that to establish rapport is important.
By taking something like her behaviors when she's jealous and being able to laugh with her at them isn't to deny the pain, the anguish that goes with it, but is to make a separation between Hazel and her behavior. That her behavior can be something to laugh at. Hazel and Hazel's anguish over those feelings, with those feelings, is not something to laugh at.
No, as a matter of fact, I pretend like I don't know him. And like,
oh, great! I'm sorry. You pretend like you don't know
well, in
him?
the sense of I'm not.
I'm now going to negatively hallucinate what's going on right over there, and I'm just having a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Now I'm going to leave the room, but I'm...
Right, exactly. And then I try and go out and entertain myself somehow. You know.
Oh, well, we're laughing, but that must be very unpleasant.
Yeah, it's just, I know it's silly.
Well, you know that.
Yeah, but it still feels that it doesn't feel so good.
Okay, so you don't want that to be the case.
No.
To help you appreciate how Leslie was using humor in this context to maintain rapport and to generate a lot of good states, we'd like to contrast this session with a small segment from another client session that Leslie has done with a young woman named Paula, where Leslie is also maintaining rapport, but it takes on a quite different look and sound.
First of all, what do you want that for? What will this give you that you don't have now?
I think that it would be, to me, my concept of it is that it would be an appropriate representation of who I feel I am inside. And I'd like that reflected on the outside.
Okay, so your experience presently is that when you see yourself or the way you feel in your clothes, is that it's a mismatch?
Yes.
Okay, so you want the external to be how you think of yourself on the inside.
Right.
One of the things that's fascinating in the work that you do is that through your information gathering process, you don't merely ask questions to gather information. You make statements, and you're calibrating, you're watching to see what kind of response you get back, and you get your information that way, and you are very provocative at times.
As much as I can get away with, yes.
Yeah.
I get higher quality information that way. If I sit back and I am being very professional and I'm asking my rote meta-model questions about how specifically and what specifically and when specifically, I'm going to get the same quality of information back. The more provocative I can be And the boundaries of being provocative are, one, your own ethics, and two, what will allow you to maintain rapport. But the more provocative that I can be, then I'm getting experience back. I have higher quality information coming back to me. Tell me about a situation in which this jealousy occurs, so I get...
Right. Well, I know that there's no real reason to be jealous in the sense of that he...
philanderer,
right.
cheat.
Right. No, I know that's not the case.
So, philanderer, cheat, and you really want to know, what's going on in this relationship.
Yes, yes. What does she believe is going on? And that's my way of finding out, as well as, if I can, eliciting humor about it.
It's like, I choke up around here and I go, eek, and...
You don't put a little sign on him that says, property of Hazel.
No. No. As a matter of fact, I pretend like I don't know him. And like,
oh, great. Sorry. You pretend like you don't know
well, in
him?
the sense of, I'm not...
I'm now going to negatively hallucinate what's going on right over there.
You're checking for possessiveness
Yes.
on her part.
Yes. I mean, does she want to? Would she like to put a sign on him that says Hazel's property? But no,
Another example of making a statement to gather information about the relationship is as follows.
How long have you been married?
A little over a year.
A little over a year.
Yeah.
How long did you go together before that?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so you guys know each other.
Yeah. And we've been living together 2 years before that. So.
Uh-huh. Well, great that there's still a lot of intensity and all of that.
More than ever.
More than ever?
Yeah.
More than ever?
Yeah, in a way, it's sweeter for me.
I would like to make the point to those of you who are using this to learn that there's no replacement for knowing the meta model. That's what guides your behavior. It's not about learning it and then using it as a rote set of external behaviors, about asking those how specifically, when specifically. But by learning it completely, you will then have those intuitions such that you know you have to have that information. And then use your flexibility behavior to get the information in other ways besides asking those questions, those specific questions.
Here's another example of Leslie making statements to gather information. If you missed it the first time, watch and listen for what Leslie was responding to as she read off a list and Hazel progressively went through different states.
You can hear the kind voice, the one that believes in you and encourages you, the one that knows that you don't always have to be perfect and right and graceful and beautiful and smart and na, 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 na.
And what you did next was take her through the sequence of knowing she was awkward.
As always, the point can't be made too often, is that your client, your subject, will always tell you what to do by their responses. So in this case, Hazel's responses, as I continued down that list of words, told me how she needed to have a different view of herself. And I could count on, from previous knowledge, that she wasn't going to be gentle or, as she said before, forgiving with herself. So by directing her to see herself through her husband's eyes, a better chance of doing that.
Later on in the session,
Yes.
as you were building a new meaning, a new complex equivalence about her wanting him to be happier with her than anyone else,
Yes.
you also were gathering information and making the same kinds of provocative statements with humor to gather information and to check on, did she really want him to herself? Was she overly possessive?
The basis of your wanting it, it's not about pinning him in. It's not about locking him up. It's not about wanting him to be happy with you by denying him anything. It's that his being more of who he wants to be when he's with you. Wanting him to be happier with you than with anyone else, that's not a selfish thing. I mean, it's like, I'm going to keep you, and I don't give a damn if you're miserable. or whatever. You said I do, that's it, turkey. Forget, what's this happiness crap? Essentially, I went out on the limb in telling her, yes, you can want him to be happier with you than with anyone else. Now, in order for me to do that, I have to satisfy some other criteria for me to know this was the appropriate thing to do. And that criteria is that indeed this is going to enhance his experience and not diminish it. So I playfully, but I was paying very close attention to how she was responding to the idea about pinning him up, that he wasn't going to be able to have a good time, that her wanting him to be happier included his being happy with other people besides just her.
We now move from rapport and gathering information to accessing resources. You utilized a resource that you accessed prior to
The beginning of the session.
beginning of the session.
Yes, yes, I did. When I first sat down with Hazel in this situation, I elicited in her a more comfortable state where she was breathing and feeling relaxed in this context. And then I was able to use that again.
No, I just was double checking anyway.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
Yes?
Yeah, it's there.
All right, because I want to work with that part, find out about it. First of all, I would like you to take a deep breath. Something about accessing resources that I think is important for you is that it puts it out of place to consider it in a 1, 2, 3 steps. You're accessing resource states always. Don't pass them up because you don't know when you're going to need them. It's sort of like you want to make sure they're there when you need them. When she goes into some unpleasant negative state, the more resources I have already elicited, then I can pull her back out. What about something just for you, about you, that doesn't have to do with other people?
Oh, I got a great sense of humor.
We're going to use that a lot.
Now, you utilize that anchor for humor several times during the interaction to pull her out of states into more resourceful states.
Yes. What just happened?
Well, I like going, well, it would be terrible to lose him.
Yeah, but it's like
I mean, I would manage.
you're already in the grief.
You also reinforce that anchor.
Well, yes. For those of you who are
the things you take for granted.
for those of you who are learning anchoring, because you've gotten it once, so that, say it is humor, and the person is in that state and you get an anchor for it, well, terrific, and then you use it again. Well, the next time that they exhibit that kind of humor with you, that's an opportunity not to be passed by to go ahead and reinforce your anchor for humor. It just intensifies it. It makes it that much stronger. Well, no, yeah, we're going to make some more. You have lots of examples, so we can find some that are of one and some that are of another.
I can think of him with my mother. That's a man and a woman. But I mean, what's the difference here?
You trust Mom, anyway. That's good.
Right. Well,
Another important resource that you accessed and anchored and utilized through the session was her feelings of
being unforgettable.
yes.
It's like, I think that's important for you to pay attention to. It's like, first I had her access the memories of where she had made him happier and waited until she had them. And then having her remember what it was like for her, feeling-wise, to participate in them. So then I added some of those feelings. She added some of those feelings. But what I wanted most of all, that wasn't enough. What I wanted most of all was, in connection with those memories, was for her to experience that she is unforgettable to him. And it was when I had her access that I anchored that state in her. And I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to memories that you have, times when you know that you made him happier than he could be with anyone else. You don't have to talk about him. I just want you to go, and I would like you to go and get 3.
oh dear.
I know it's going to be hard work for you to be that sort of,
Yeah, because
give yourself that credit.
right, because I feel like I should check with him, and ask him, well, did this make you happier? But so I feel like, gosh, it's a little presumptuous of me, but I can think of one for sure. I think. Let's see. Oh yeah.
All right. Now
Yeah, I got 3.
Oh, you've got 3.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got 3. Now I'd like you to. How are you feeling when you were participating in each of those experiences? Great. Powerful. In a gentle.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Yeah.
Now I want to ask you something. Do you think that those are something that he could forget?
No.
I believe you. Okay. Now I want you to, with that, I'd like you to take a look.
Other resource states that you access and utilized were one of the states we talked about before, which was the state of dissociation, so that she could take a look at those scenes without experiencing the overwhelming feelings of jealousy.
Yes. Another example of that there's so many different kinds of dissociation for you to be able to utilize. Another one was the example where it was a good example for her in terms of the present state, in terms of jealousy, where he hadn't noticed her for an hour. And I laughed, elicited some humor, and backed her up to the beginning of the hour. It would be too much to try to intervene in there at the end of that hour. The feelings would be too strong and too overwhelming. So again, I'm utilizing the principles of dissociation, dissociating her from that overwhelming state to the beginning of the hour when she first notices it. Also, that's when I want her to have that strategy, to be making those discriminations about what's going on. Is this worth being jealous about? As you could tell by watching the tape, like accessing resources, doing interventions is also not something that I wait to do. It's not like the 4th step. There isn't any reason not to begin making interventions when you know that they're going to have a positive effect, when you know they're going to lead to some sort of positive outcome. So you can do it from the beginning and encourage you to do so as well.
Some of the things that you do at the beginning may not seem at first to be interventions, yet they are critical to establishing and setting up what you're going to be doing later on.
How long have you been married?
A little over a year.
A little over a year.
Yeah.
How long did you go together before that?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so you guys know each other.
Yeah.
Another type of intervention that Leslie is doing throughout the session is building complex equivalences, changing the meaning of experiences and behaviors.
Well, building a complex equivalence is to do with building a relationship between experience and the meaning of that experience. And in these situations, these are meanings for these experiences that will enhance and enrich both Hazel's experience and the relationship as well. Also, if they don't work, that is, if she doesn't accept them, then it tells me what needs to be done. At that point then, whereas in this situation, because they worked, because they were established, it's an intervention. When going after a complex equivalence doesn't work, it's gathering information. That's how it's arbitrary really to break these behaviors up in terms of gathering information, establishing rapport, accessing resources and interventions, because depending on the response that you get back from the person you're working with, it can be any one of those.
Once you have established rapport, gathered information, accessed resources, and utilized those resources with interventions, then you need to test and do several tests to make sure if your outcomes have been achieved.
Yes.
And you do that in each of the different contexts.
I have no other evidence that what I have done is worthwhile. And I need to test it with several different examples because there can be a big difference depending on just who that woman was or just what name Ruth said. when he described his day. Those differences can make a significant difference in me knowing whether or not I've done what needs to be done. What else? Actually, when I'm testing, I'm not so much going, am I done? I'm going, what else needs to be done? And by remaining skeptical, essentially skeptical, rather than smug or satisfied that I've done everything and that's it, and now I know that it's done, allows me to be attentive.
A great example of that is when you did test and have her run through the second context in which he is telling her about his day. You added a few questions for her to ask herself while she was listening to that, to distract her from making those pictures that haunt her.
If what she's doing while she's listening to him is sorting for, paying attention to, well, what went on with that other woman, there's more useful, there's more meaningful aspects of the ongoing experience for her to be attending to. That still relate to the issue of jealousy. Is there something that's threatening? And it's more useful for her to be considering, does he know I love him? Now, the only other thing I'd like you to do, I'd like you to go back to another one. And while he's telling you, I'd like you to look at something, okay? I'd like you to look at him, and I'd like you to notice whether or not, I want you to ask the question on the inside, does he know how much I love him?
And as she runs through and gets a really good example for you to use as a test, she finally gets to the point where she realizes that things indeed have slowed down. And she now has the time to be able to make an evaluation in the present and to choose among all of the available options to her in terms of her behaviors what's most appropriate.
Well, let's have you go get any example. In person, one, or one where he's telling you, and just find out what it's like.
Oh, I got a good one. Things are much slower. I mean, he's not talking slower, but oh no, it's like that. It's like it's all slowed down.
It gives you a lot of time to have choices,
and to
have
perceive
feelings.
what's happening.
Yes, and again, there's that the time factor in that keeps it from being. So you take it from a situation in which she was just overwhelmed and felt bad, and then it was just a sequence of bad feelings, one after another, and a very rigid set of behaviors about how to respond. By changing that, by her experience slowing down, she can be more in control. She can have more choice about what's going on. It's not as threatening when you feel like you have enough time to respond and to decide.
And note that during the testing that Leslie sits back and does not utilize any of the anchors, but allows the person to go through the process themselves, because you want to make sure.
Well, I'm not going to be there to hold her wrist or her arm or anything else. I need to not, wouldn't be a test if I was using any of the anchors. I have to know what is going to happen when she does it all on her own.
One of the advantages of doing thorough future pacing is that it is a kind of ecological check. That you oftentimes do, in fact, get aspects that come up that you hadn't already accounted for, and it gives you the opportunity to know that and take care of them.
As I said before, future pacing is, depending on the responses of the subject, can be gathering information. It can be accessing a resource. It can be an intervention in and of itself. The other thing about future pacing is if you don't do it, you have no assurance whatsoever that all that you have done won't stay within the context of the therapy session. Your future pacing is what you're doing to ensure the generalization of those new choices, new resources, new behaviors into the contexts where they're needed.
And so now the final future pacing during the session, one for each one of the two different contexts, together with a wonderful verbal reframe having to do with opportunity.
When do you think the next time's going to be
Oh, Lord.
that you're going to have the opportunity?
Could be today.
Could be today. Okay.
Could be tomorrow.
Could be tomorrow. So what sort of situation? You think you'll be with other people or just
At home,
at
and
home?
he's telling me about his day.
Okay, so it might be the end of today.
Yeah.
All right. So I'd like you to think about when you'll see him first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then imagine him telling you, and imagine
It's really different.
I'd like you to do one more into the future with where you're in person.
Okay.
Okay.
That one. I mean,
You can imagine this
It's
happening.
amazing that I can just get them just like that. I think that's terrific.
Well, and it's like it's been something you felt often enough
Yeah, and
that
I
it's
mean-
like it's a category of experience.
Yeah, and there's been a future thing I've been worried about with it too. Here we go. Let's see. That's really nice. The feeling lasts, even when we're not together at the party.
Yeah.
You know, the feeling lasts.
In presenting you with this session in this form, in a video form, it's our desire that you have a learning tool by which you can not only acquire new skills, but also recognize skills that you already have, that you can have a means by which to organize your existing behavior as well as acquire new ones. I have a full appreciation for the kind of diligence it takes to become proficient in neurolinguistic programming. And I really do appreciate the time that you're taking to use this tool in learning to do more and better for yourself and for the people that you're working with.